Hello and welcome to Dyslexia Explored. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host, with my co-host, Jolie. Joe,
Hi, everyone.
we've got an interesting guest today who is on a journey to try and solve something with a technology and is in a very early stage. And Joe has invited her on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about her, and then we'll introduce who it is.
Great. So I found this person via LinkedIn and was immediately captured by what it is she's doing. Again, someone with dyslexia wanting to make a difference for children with dyslexia. And we all know that with dyslexia, with any sort of neurodivergence, especially when you're a child, your confidence and your resilience and your ability to believe in yourself are absolutely crucial to your success. So I don't want to give anything more away about what Rose is doing. So I'm going to hand over and let Rose introduce herself and her software. But I know that this is going to be an absolutely brilliant and inspiring conversation, especially for the parents and educators out there who are listening. So, yeah, I'd love to welcome Rose Lord to the podcast today.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. And so thank you so much for inviting me along to share my journey.
So,
Ah,
what would be really helpful is for listeners to kind of hear a little bit about where you're at now, okay? But not too much, just a little snapshot of where we're at now. And then we'll rewind to the beginning of the story and join the dots and then continue on from where we are now. How
Okay.
about that?
Yeah, great. So where we're at in my journey, I'm now actually a neurodivergent parent to two children. And through that journey of being a parent to two children who they actually go undiagnosed, but they are certainly deep thinkers and feelers. And through the journey that we went on, particularly with my daughter, it stimulated a real need to support children in the moment at times when they don't feel good enough, when their confidence is at rock bottom and they just don't feel like they are like everybody else. And we'll come back to that as my feeling as a child. But this then brought an idea to bring children's imaginations to life in a way that works for them. When you do have a neurodivergent brain, and whether that is dyslexia or whether that happens to be ADHD, or whether we do have to recognize, I think, at this point where awareness is that actually every child has emotions, and emotions can be difficult things to navigate if you can't find the right words or the right feelings to put to those emotions. And I went on a journey of trying to understand that a bit more and looking at psychology methods, looking at particularly mood management, which is where really the name of our brand and what we're trying to achieve comes from, as My Best Mood. And I also looked into how many children actually enjoy reading, and only a third of children are enjoying reading. And when you actually think about that and break it down, a third of those children fit into our sort of neurodivergent category, and reading is challenging. It's not really accessible for their minds. So the other third might be picked up because they just, parents are busy, etc., and not really having that much time to devote to reading. But I really wanted to focus on those children who are like me growing up and give them the right access and tools so that they could find a love for reading. So what we have tried to create is a platform that not only enables children to make sense of how they think and feel in a way that works for them, and that could be through voice notes, that could be through drawing within a journal area, but actually creating stories on demand. And these stories on demand will be driven by their own imagination. So they can come up with weird and wonderful ideas. They could be the protagonist in their own story. And we then create these digital storybooks that have pictures and words, but the accessibility functions that we're incorporating into the app are the proven methods that we have seen for years. So evidence-led accessibility functions. So I'm sure that you're well aware of the coloured filters. So for me, a cyan was my chosen colour, but of course for every brain, it's a different colour. And so a whole spectrum of colours can be used and the backgrounds can be changed. The size of the font can be changed to suit the reader. And the stories are also read aloud. So we've been working very hard on trying to make the application as accessible as possible, with a neurodivergent mind clearly in play and a dyslexic's mind, and how logically minded actually we can be, right? Because whilst we have the incredible ability to think outside the box, and why wouldn't anyone else think of doing things like that? But also, we also like things to be a little bit ordered and structured. So whilst it is designed, it's designed to not be exclusive, to be inclusive, if that makes sense. So we didn't want our users to feel this is just for them. You know, we want this to feel like a cool tool that anyone could use, but it is designed to suit the needs of those brains that do access the world a little bit differently.
So is this an actual app right now, or is it in development?
Not yet. Yeah, great question. So we secured Innovate UK funding back in about this time last year, actually, and we're now getting towards having an MVP. So that's a minimum value product that people can test. So we're heading into our beta phase of testing. So yeah, openings are coming for people to jump on board and support with that testing so that we can continue to get it right and actually deliver something that really does meet the needs of our brains.
So is it the stories you're planning to make, are they like AI generated from what the student's saying? Is that right?
Yeah. So that's, great question. So we use AI within the tool, not to replace the child's voice, but to allow it to actually bring it to life. So they can think everything is driven from their own ideas. So they might ask for a story about a bumblebee who is going to make a magic rainbow, or anything abstract, or they might want to be star in their favorite film, for example. So whatever is in their head. I mean, my daughter, who's 11, she loves playing her part in High School Musical, and loves that Troy comes to get her from her bedroom and they go on a wonderful adventure, and she's the guest star in High School Musical. So we are using the app at home, and they're, seeing their imaginations come to life. It's really captivating them, but so endearing to actually see the joy on children's faces who struggle with ordinary books. And I think it's a great shame that there are such wonderful children's authors, but right now they're not accessible to all children. And, I think that's a bridge that we need to try and shift. So it's not fully available yet, the app, and we do need to make sure that we go through the right level of testing and we're responsible around safeguarding too, because it is using AI, and for those obvious reasons that we don't want children to try and break it, in a sense that we need to make sure that those conversations that are had within the app experience are ethical and responsible and meet the needs of and comply with children's code. So it is built around the children's code. So that means we don't collect any children data, only their age and their nickname. So we've got no identifiable data. And also we're using the Online Safety Act as a guide as to how long the child should engage in a digital format each day. So we are limiting usage so that they don't end up on a screen for too long, prolonged time, which of course is critical at this time of growing concern around digital online experiences. So it's designed to not replicate social media in any way. So there are no likes, no comparisons, etc. So it is really their private space, which allows them to check in how they feel with a moodometer, which is actually also aligned to the zones of regulation. So that's helpful for ongoing for teachers too, so that they get a better understanding as to where they are. And then the experience then adapts to where they are in their journey that day. And then they can journal each day. So we are trying to also create good habits with journaling, and that being really powerful with metacognition, as we know, like affirmations being so important and so powerful to how we can actually shape our own minds through having positive experiences, but also positive information. So if we think about kind of mood management theory, it is a psychology framework that whatever we put into our body, that could be through digital experiences, it could be from using skincare, whatever that is, it shapes us, our journey in the day, doing our exercise in the morning, listening to music, whatever we're absorbing is reflective of our mood. So that is very much where the name My Best Mood comes from.
I've got so many questions, but I know Joe will have some already. So Joe.
Well, I suppose for me, it's just an observation of, well, a couple of observations. I mean, what an absolutely brilliant resource for children with dyslexia. He are often such big picture thinkers that actually traditional storytelling books, especially at the sort of younger primary age, are quite formulaic. But sort of there's normally a boy and a girl and a cat stuck up a tree, and I know it's phonics development and I know that there's value in that, but actually a story that can almost expand to the limits of your imagination is absolutely brilliant. We've got 2 children with dyslexia, and I remember often doing reading with them when they were little, and especially our youngest would start and say, right, so is that the end of the book? So what I think happens next is I think they go on, and they actually had a much better adventure in her imagination than they did on the written pages of the book, to give that level of creativity. And I suppose the other thing it immediately made me thought is so much of what we say to children and the students that we work is almost like be the hero of your own story. It's build your confidence, build your resilience, actually go out and just grab life by both hands. So to be able to even see that in a book at such a formative stage is just absolutely, it's just so exciting when you think of what it's doing on that sort of deeper emotional level for the children reading these books. So yes, it's great.
It's not what I expected, actually. When you said My Better Mood, right? I was thinking it would be like a check-in and talk to you about how your day went. And yeah, I don't know. So how does it actually work with helping them with their mood? I'm intrigued by that because you're trying to do it in a sort of roundabout way by the sounds of it. Like you adapt the story according to their mood. Is that what you're saying?
So it's a great question. So actually, when I shared the app with our first school, which was a very exciting opportunity to do that, they could see the benefit of big moment thinking. So actually, what I mean by that is can be used in situations that feel like big moments for children. So that might be that they're moving house, or that might be that they've experienced a bereavement, or they're really just not having a very happy time at school, but actually finding a way to then make sense of why those big things happen and how we can use our emotions to help steady those times. And because it is on demand and these stories can be generated on demand, they are designed in a way for schools to use them in such way, or for parents to write stories with their children to help them make sense of those bigger feelings, but also just to bring their creativity to life. So ultimately, as we move through this journey, and we're still at early stage development, we will be introducing printable books. So that feeling, Joe, like you say, that wonderful feeling of I created that and I did that and it came from my mind. Well, they could also feel it and smell it and turn the pages of an actual printed book. So that is in our pipeline of development, and giving it to the grandparents or aunt for Christmas this is something I've done. And that sense of pride and that sense of confidence that actually is a big thing. Self-doubt is a huge problem in amongst these brains. I mean, I'll come to my experience this week a little later, but it's such a journey and such a mental milestone to actually believe that you can, when actually very often you're told you can't. And that limitation and the challenge that your brain then can face in those limitations of, well, I've been told so many times I'm not capable of that. And then you have to do your own self-talk to then teach you that you can. So the stories can absolutely be driven by where they are in that moment. So they can check in with how they feel. We call it our moodometer. They might feel a bit panicky. They might feel a bit, we've all had those days where we don't really want to get out of bed. We're not quite sure what we're doing here. And from there, their experience is then guided. So throughout the app, they set up a companion. So they have what we call a mood buddy. So everything is based on mood, as you'd expect. So my best mood. So we have a mood buddy, we have a mood space. And within that mood space is very much about how they are thinking and feeling, giving them the creative space to draw about it. They can talk, they can then write in a journal, which is all focused on positive psychology principles are the bedrock, really, of what we are trying to achieve. So throughout the app experience, everything is driven from positive psychology frameworks and the tone of voice that we are adapting within the app. So so they check in, but we're also encouraging those behaviours of what do I feel proud of, even if it's something small today, and what am I grateful for, and what am I most looking forward to, so that there is this element of optimism. It can feel very heavy, I think, at times growing up as a dyslexic, having gone through that journey, and you're pedaling fast and faster and faster and barely feel like you're keeping up with your peers, let alone the other challenges that come with that. And so this is a private space to help them navigate that journey. And yeah, I did feel proud I was able to read a couple of lines in the classroom today, or I'm really looking forward to seeing my cousins at the weekend. And whatever big or small it is, it all matters because it's their journey, and what matters to them matters to us, I suppose. Not that we have to be clear, we don't monitor the activity within the app, but if anything worrying is said, we do have a filter from a safeguarding perspective that we would encourage them to speak to a trusted adult or direct them to trusted channels of support, so like Childline or the Samaritans, should they say something deeply worrying. But from an ethical point of view, we have to be clear on where our boundaries kind of lie with that, which is why the journal aspect of the app is more structured. But yes, so the stories can be about anything. And I guess, from a school's perspective and an intervention perspective, if the child is having a particularly rough time on a certain area of things, whether that is school life or whether that is home life, being able to almost massage that amygdala. I always forget which part of the brain, and I can't say it either. The part of the brain that stores our feelings when we get to a challenge and store them and can't make sense of them in REM sleep. It helps to make sense of those bigger feelings before they become crisis. And that's our aspiration. We don't have data yet to prove that, but that's where we'd like to get to.
So going back to what was life like before you became aware of being dyslexic?
Well, I was very lucky. I think this probably, I must give an awful lot of credit to my warrior mum in my journey, because both my parents were teachers, in fact, but she was a primary school teacher, deputy head of some challenging schools. And of course, because of her journey and her awareness within the classroom, she spotted that I wasn't learning in the right way. So I guess actually I was only 7 years old. So being 41 now, I think probably looking back on generations that we've seen, is probably a little unusual to have been diagnosed so young, and where the awareness was. So 1984 baby.
Wow.
So yes, she was, I guess, really a bit of a pioneer.
Wow, that's great. What we often ask at that point, and it ties in, is like, what woke you up to dyslexia? And it was like your mum, but what would be intriguing is what woke your mum up to the fact that you're dyslexia? Was it an encounter? Because often it's an encounter, a person.
Yeah, so I really struggled to read, really struggled with phonics. Yeah. Sorry, it always gets me a little choked up because of just how much I struggled with reading. And she was incredibly patient, bless her. far more patient than I think I would be, and probably have been. But yeah, even simple words, cat. What does that letter say? And I had a huge processing issue. Like, even though I could see the letters clearly, I could not blend them together to make a word. Like, I would go as far as saying that reading was impossible to process for where my brain was at that age. And I guess, things became incredibly evident, I think, even after leaving nursery. Like, I was exhausted by the whole experience of going to school. Age 5, I would cry every day. I mean, I don't really remember those times, but I don't remember enjoying life either, which was sad. So I'm one of 4 children. I'm the youngest. And I think probably because all of her other children had also taken a bit more like ducks to water with the reading process, it wasn't working. And she'd probably used all of her tricks in her bow, being a teacher, primary school teacher, that thought there's definitely something fundamentally wrong with this child. So statemented very early, I think, for where we were. But my life then from that point, I think, then became very defined. It got support, of course it did, which was, what was needed. My memory of school from that point on was, we sat in what felt like a broom cupboard, excluded from the classroom because I wasn't able to learn at the same pace as other people. So I would have this session with a wonderful lady, Mrs. Leach, her name, and she was brilliant. And she helped me along the way. But the fundamentals of my brain not working is a wiring issue, right? And the way in which dyslexics' brains are wired, whether it's ADHD or autism, there are connections that aren't, and neurons within the brain that aren't functioning correctly. So I was also at that time, I think I'd not long started ballet, but my mum, looking back, and it's almost like sometimes she probably feels like she's looking in a bit of a mirror, but she was very much a let's find your strengths then mom. And she still is. She's 80 now, bless her, but you wouldn't know, she's wonderful. So she found my strength in dancing. So crikey, age 9, I think I was. Yeah, so I must have already been doing ballet. And at age 9, was I a bit older than that? Anyway, at some point I auditioned for the Royal Ballet. So I passed an awful lot of exams quickly, got distinctions in all of them, and they thought, yeah, you're ready for the Royal Ballet. So that was my first time, quite early on in my life, of rejection. And rejected by the Royal Ballet, not because I wasn't good enough, but because I was too tall. And
Wow.
Yeah, got through to the final stages and, oh, sorry, no, you'll grow up to be too tall. So the chaps won't be able to pick you up, all of those kind of things went through their minds. So yeah, that was my first rejection. And I think unless you're ready to experience rejection, it does a very interesting thing to the brain quite early on. Okay, well, I'm not good enough, and already I wasn't good at school, so now I'm not good enough to be a ballerina either, so then what? But what it did teach me very early on is that the only way to be resilient, I think, is to walk away from things that aren't serving you. And almost immediately was, well, if I can't be top at doing that, then I'm not interested, essentially. So she then found a way I could turn my strength into something different, but similar. So I took what I could do as a ballerina into rhythmic gymnastics. So yeah, so I think I was probably 10 or 11. We must have been 10. And I started to do both ballet, and I just really lost interest in ballet anyway. So my rhythmic gymnastics coaches, they were mother and daughter team, 2 other wonderful people in my life who actually did see my strength and help nurture that along the way. And within a year of starting rhythmic gymnastics, I was then spotted by the British squad. So I was then invited to be part of the national squad for rhythmic gymnastics by age 12. And that meant that I missed an awful lot of school. Handy when you don't like it. But the journey in between that, I guess it's really important to say, how bleak that probably was, from the point of diagnosis to finding these strengths and new passions that sat outside of academia. Yeah, I mean, every morning I can remember crying, lying awake at night thinking, why aren't I normal? Why can't I learn in the same way? And I'm no good at anything. And when I just to sort of reflect that to where I now am in my personal journey as a mother, when I heard my children say those things, it broke my heart. It really did. So that's, what's brought me really to having this app. But just going back then to kind of my journey as a soon to be teenager, I suppose, that became very interesting. So when you get to being in the national squad, and at that time, gymnastics actually was becoming an up and coming sport for the country, which was great. So I then received lottery funding to support the sport, and the fact that I wasn't missed quite a fair bit of school. So every weekend I'd go to the National Sports Centre to train there, and that was an experience in itself. But it became very grueling on the body. And yeah, I'm sure you probably preempt what comes next. But then, of course, my body started to grow into being more of a teenage adult's body. And therefore, I didn't go from a small frame, or my hips started to expand. And that then came with eating disorder challenges, which then in the end kind of had to step away from it. But, I walked away from that journey of life. I have 2 British titles. I was the captain of our group when we won Group British Champions, the championships, and have a duet British title too, and was number 4 in the country in that time. And I think these experiences are why I think it's so important that actually children are able to find their strengths, whether that is through their own creative ability to create brilliant stories, or whether they can find strengths in other ways that outweigh the system that isn't set up to find them. And, not every parent is as lucky as, and not every child is as lucky as I was to have championing parents. And I mean, my dad was his own journey. He was a professional footballer, but he wasn't allowed to play for the team that he wanted to play for. And so there was a block from his parents' side. And actually, I think, recognizing where children have their own passions and helping them along their way to get to where they want to be and supporting them is really important. But not everybody has that opportunity. So again, this app is really designed in a way to try and help children find that.
It's fascinating. And want to just rewind just to a little point, that gap between discovering dyslexia and starting to find something you were really good at and recognize it being good at. A lot of children with dyslexia, even once they can read to a certain standard, which gets them by, it's still affecting their lives. And sometimes people think, oh, you can read, that's dyslexia sorted. Could you say something about that context in terms of that segment of your journey? How well could you read? Did you get to a point where you could read and sort of get by, or how was that?
I mean, I struggled a lot, but I think actually it was my sport that saved me an awful lot, because, and it's a really poignant point actually probably in my journey as a person. So at age 15, I actually lived in denial of my dyslexia until 36, would you believe it? But thank you for pulling this part of my journey out, because it is fundamentally a game changer. So my dad introduced me to a program that actually supported the changes in my brain, which allowed me then to access words in a way that had never been possible. So just to answer your question more directly, reading was brutal and was persistently brutal. So I could never get to the end of a page without my eyes completely watering with trying to keep the words in the right place. So that fuzz, that jumbled, everything was sliding off a page. It was even at a point of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, I really struggled. Unless it was, you could use a ruler and read it really carefully. But even then, making sense of something. And I will never forget that feeling of shame having to read out in the classroom. So I'd have been year 6 probably at school, and my teacher invited me to come and read. And there I am, my palms are sweating, and you got that whole feeling right now of your body just wanting to be swallowed because you know that you're not going to be able to do it. And I just distinctly remember just making up words that weren't even there. They weren't written there, but my brain couldn't process what was written on a page to be able to say it out loud. It was actually impossible.
That's some pretty extreme dyslexia. I mean, I know I've got dyslexia, but it's moderate dyslexia. And then there's extreme dyslexia like you're experiencing there. That's really challenging. What
Yeah.
turned it around? What was that program then?
So the program is now known as Zing Performance, but at the time I was invited to be a guinea pig. I could call it a guinea pig, but a very early case study on this program, which was at the time known as, or actually it was called DDAT, Dyslexia, Dyspraxia, ADHD treatment.
Okay.
And it then moved on to become the DOOR program. So founded by a gentleman called Winford Dorr. He's a father of 4, but his own daughter really struggled with learning. And through her journey, he wanted to help her. And then as a consequence, has helped tens of thousands of people, not just children, but adults too, worldwide since. But this program, it was the most simple exercises that I did consistently for 6 months, which actually retrained my brain and built connections, lasting connections in the brain that actually enabled me to read and write, process information.
Wow.
And it was the most incredible journey, not just from like an access perspective, like, oh, I can read now. The whole development of me, I think, as a person, and being told you can't do that, and knowing that you couldn't do that, and the limitations that put in place for me as a person was significant. And essentially, you would juggle with beanbags. You'd pick things up and you'd stand up on a chair, turn around, sit back down, stand up, turn around the other way. And essentially, the way in which these exercises work is that it challenges the vestibular system, so your balance system, but it also stimulates the cerebellum, which is the part of the brain at the back that is responsible for how we learn and store essentially information. So I think Winford describes it as the librarian of the brain, and that is where information can come from. And one of the biggest challenges with dyslexia and associated conditions is that we don't have enough working memory, right? Do we? Everything is happening up here in the thinking brain, and then therefore nothing has been made automatic properly. So we're having to rely on our working memory capacity, so it very easily becomes overloaded. What this program did for me was, and what it does for people, it is to, no one really wants fixing, but this just made life more automatic. So the skills of reading became possible. I mean, it was like someone had...
I don't understand.
I mean, it was like someone had waved a magic wand.
Yeah.
Honestly.
So let me get this right. So you're doing gymnastics at that time.
Yes.
Right? Which involves lots of different kinds of movements. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And that didn't solve it in terms of balance,
no, but I do think it was
so
a catalyst. I think actually from the point of starting to do much more regular physical activity, and that is right? Physical activity will help our cognition. That's proven. And it's interesting that when I did start to do more physical activity, my ability did improve probably more, right? And when I didn't exercise, I noticed, and my mum particularly noticed, that I was more frustrated, more agitated, needed to burn off more energy. And I guess those signs now, someone might see that as ADHD brain.
And you probably suspect you might have unidentified ADHD. I felt the same and got a diagnosis eventually. I was like, oh gosh, I don't know if I want to get a formal diagnosis of ADHD. It's another thing to navigate around. I'll just live with it. And then you realize, actually, I'm not living with this. I've got lots of coping strategies, and it's been helpful actually getting there and getting
Yeah.
onto the meds. I've actually found them helpful, not the type who just takes things, but it's been helpful. Anyway, that's an aside. I sometimes think that we should rename this podcast instead of Dyslexia Explored. It's Dyslexia and ADHD Explored, because so many of us have it co-occurring because it's such a strong co-occurrence. I think it's 40% co-occurrence. If you've got dyslexia, you've probably got that kind of 40% chance of having ADHD.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think really where I was in my very early childhood, there was so much going on. You might have even called it global delay. You know, I couldn't hold a conversation. I very often hurry up, get your words out by my siblings, and I couldn't. My brain would not work quick enough. And to hold a conversation with someone, forget it. And you become that shy kid, right? Because you can't find your voice because it can't come quick enough. And you want to say things that have taken place in a conversation that happened 5 minutes ago. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's what I should have said at the time. But my brain didn't think quickly enough to make that happen. And yeah, I mean, my journey has been fascinating. I guess, looking back at even on my own childhood experiences, it's an interesting story, from going from completely not being able to process words to, I ended up, as a result of going through this program, never thought I'd even get to do A levels. I was officially written off by the education system. She's not going to get any aid, she's not even going to get any GCSEs. There was no expectation at all that this journey that went on for 6 months built these lasting connections in my brain. I turned it around. I passed all of my GCSEs as a result, not to the handsome grades that my siblings were able to achieve, but I got B's and C's.
Did you pass English?
I passed English.
Wow. And did you pass maths?
I passed maths.
Wow.
B's and C's are pretty impressive.
To go from that to actually passing English, there's one thing, I got some GCSEs, but to actually get them all and English, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, it did feel like it at the time, and I was still, there was this element of kind of like disappointment in a sense of, but I still couldn't achieve what my sisters achieved and so on and so forth. But from the journey that I'd been on to not being able to read anything, not being able to retain anything. And I remember this distinct memory. I mean, so I trained every day apart from Wednesdays and Sundays in my journey as a rhythmic gymnast. And it was straight home from school. My life was actually, looking back, brutally exhausting. But get home, get changed, go to the gym for 3 hours, come home, eat the leftover dinner, and do my homework and go to bed, repeat. But doing my homework at 8 p.m, not the best time to do homework anyway. But I remember it was science, and I can't remember the exact topic, but I remember this feeling of, oh my God, I remember the answer. It's something that I had learned that day. I actually remembered. And that for me was like a turning point of, oh, hang on. Maybe I can do academia. Maybe I am not a complete write-off after all. And there are some GCSEs I could achieve. Now I know my brain can read stuff now and I can retain information and be able to then process it and write it down. And that was a skill I just did not have. And that is what this program did for me. It turned what I had upstairs, I guess, the abilities that were always there.
Yeah.
Into a processed skill. And
I think
that was fundamental.
That's so important. And I think it's hard for people who haven't kind of lived with dyslexia in a family to fully understand how locked in your ideas can be. When you can't explain your ideas, when they come out as a big jumble of words, when they make sense in your head, when you can't write them down to communicate your story or idea with someone else, when you can't think clearly. We use these tools around us to think clearly. There's a reason why we write our ideas down, because it kind of reflects back to us. Is that what we're really thinking? No, I'm going to rewrite that again. And you kind of need that sort of feedback process to start thinking more clearly, because you can't do it all just in your head. So what I'm fascinated by is that so often children need a way to get their ideas out their head and communicate. And I would love to know, you learned how to read, which is super important, but did you use any other techniques in that kind of learning process? Did you visualize it? Did you draw? Did you diagram? Did you mind map? Did you sing? Or did you just do it kind of regular? I just wrote my notes down and reread them and rewrote them, and then it stuck. How did it work?
Interestingly, I don't seem to remember having such a distinct problem with writing, even to an extent which is really funny. Like, I don't remember having a real blocker with spellings, which I find incredibly interesting, given that my brain just could not process written words to absorb it in, and comprehension was non-existent. But I do remember, I mean, this was at age 14. I do remember this feeling of like wanting to be an author, because I felt like I had so many ideas in my head. Like, it was almost like a playground of ideas. But just as you've described, being able to, number one, articulate those in a way that makes sense to me through verbal words was challenging, because of the way I just had a bit of a blocker with processing. But also getting those ideas out on pen to paper. And where do you start with a blank piece of paper? And that was probably the most frightening thing to look at, isn't it? A blank piece of paper when you have a playground of thoughts that you're trying to make sense of, and how do you get those out? And I think, that is what technology is enabling us to do. Even now as an adult dyslexic, I find ChatGPT voice notes the most powerful thing to be able to help me to sharpen my thinking, structure my thinking in a way that, yes, that makes more logical sense, but we're learning from that all of the time. I'm learning from that all of the time, because I work in communications now. You would not believe it. I have written for 2 of the big 4 banks, and supported learning, design and development for one, and managed the internal communications for another. And so, yeah, I guess my journey is quite extraordinary in that. But you're absolutely right. Being able to articulate what you mean when you've got so many ideas and thinking outside the box. And this is my thinking. And you can always see and feel your cogs whirring, can't you, with how you do think, and to be able to then bring that together. And I think that is where the advances in technology can be so powerful, to create a level playing field for those that can't access words or find words hard in the moment. And I know this is how I want it to come across, but these are all of my ideas. Help me put them into a structure that helps my argument. And everybody can do that. But now I think, because of the advances in technology, it actually allows our brains to be at the advantage that it deserves, because actually we have got better thinking, we're more powerful thinking, we're outside the box, creative thinking. And now we can bring it to life in a way with a level playing field, because everybody else is using AI, right? So now we are on the front foot, which is, I think, a really groundbreaking, exciting time to be at as a dyslexic thinker. But at the time, that is not possible, right? If we turn back the clock 2 decades, none of that exists. In fact, 3 decades, really, for me, none of that existed. And therefore, you do find coping strategies. I was all right at art, but I wasn't brilliant at art. That was just another kind of dagger in my chest, really. Everyone else was pretty good at art, and I was fine, but not brilliant. So do you know what? From an academic point of view, I'm not actually sure how I did cope. But
you did. You got through.
Somehow.
You got your GCSEs. You got
I did.
Your A levels.
And until that program, who knows, right? The rest of my trajectory for life, I really honestly don't know what that would have looked like had I not have done that program. And I mean, the fact I went to university, I studied communication. and got a 2-1, 3 marks off getting a first, which was a real shame.
Well done.
And none of that would have been possible. But what it did teach me is, look, crikey, you did do this and you applied yourself. And what else could you do if you did that? And, one of the most fascinating things of that journey for me was I decided I was going to read a book a week. I could never read before, but because now it was an unlocked skill, I was like, right, I'm going to read a book a week. And that became my focus. And I think, we do get a little obsessed with having a focus and go into super hyper focus mode. And that was me. No, I've committed now. And I think once I commit to something, that's my loyalty, I guess, around commitment and not stepping back from things until I think they've been done properly.
So talking about sort of trajectories and sort of life development, I'm just rewinding back to something that you said earlier in the conversation, that was essentially you had this moment at 15 and learnt to read. Academia became more straightforward, and massive congratulations on GCSEs, A-levels, degree, that's all fabulous. But you also said that you almost denied your dyslexia until you were 36. What happened at 36 that made you sort of have a shift on that?
Yeah, great question. So this brings me back to my own children. When I became a mum, I knew I was going to become a mum. I did not want to pass on the same pain and experience that I had growing up. So I was committed. I actually played Mozart. I looked at all the things I should do whilst my babies were growing in me, so that I could, even whilst they were there, build brain connections. Sadly, I was not successful in doing that. And when my daughter started to go to school in reception, wow, it really did feel like I was looking in a mirror of my own journey in many ways. But she was an incredible speaker from before the age of 2. I mean, I spoke to her a lot while she was developing. So it was kind of apparent that she was going to be really switched on and not face the same processing challenges that I did, for example. But
because she could chat away and keep up and so on, which you couldn't. And so you were thinking, oh, we're okay, we're doing good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So once we then she struggled at nursery with adjustments to changes, so transitions. This was always recognised. She was fine when she was inside, but if she had to go outside, she got really overwhelmed by those changes in the day and transition periods, which I guess, having not been a mum before, I thought, well, that maybe that's okay. But as her development grew, we realised that there was probably a lot more going on in her little mind too, that perhaps wasn't quite so obvious initially. So reception life for my daughter was particularly challenging. Always pulled off me in the morning, screaming, I'm not going, and the teacher peeling her off me. And I thought that this is not a happy child. This is a mirror moment every single day. And quite honestly, I felt like I bashed my head against a wall during her first year at school, not really being heard or listened to or even respected, quite frankly, by the school, which is an awful thing to say, but honest. And that was the reality for us. So then COVID came along. She was only in year 1. And of course, we were forced to homeschool. And it became immediately apparent to me that there was a blocker, one with how she could sit still, but also, again, process information that she was being given to then be able to do things. And the procrastination would set in and she'd find every opportunity to go and do something else. So I'll just be back, just be back in a minute. I'll hide under the table. Got one hiding under the table, and my son was only 3 at the time. So he was dancing on the table, literally climbing curtains at one point. I mean, it was the most interesting time of our lives for many reasons, for many households. But it was immediately apparent that she was really struggling, but the school hadn't really picked up on it. So during that time of COVID, I was 36, and I was horrified when I started to look into just how many families were going through this same horrible journey of state system not recognizing their children's challenges, and quite frankly, not really open to doing anything about it. And it made me sit and think, and actually it was LinkedIn that really, really encouraged me really to be a bit brave.
Disclose.
Yeah, be
Disclose.
brave and share and
Yeah.
start sharing my story, because I thought, actually, if I can inspire one family and help one family with the journey that I've been on, from not able to read to using that program, and so fundamental it was to changing my brain. My daughter did it, and she went from having no interest in reading to reading for pleasure. Like,
Oh,
it was
really? So you did it
yeah.
at
So
the COVID stage, at that stage?
she was a bit too young just then, but
When
it was
did she
soon
do it?
after. So she was just 6, just about to
Okay.
turn 7. And we actually have done it a few times with her, but because it started to unblock some of her learning challenges, but what it left behind was anxiety, which I'm sure COVID had a huge part to play in, as it has done for so many children.
Well, I think a lot of families discovered their children's difficulties
Yeah.
and dyslexia and other difficulties through COVID, because they saw what the child was doing when they're reading or they're writing or going through some work, which you don't see in the same kind of way doing homework.
Exactly. And I think, it was a real eye-opener for the state system, I think.
Yes.
Quite honestly. And is this child learning anything? Are they even able to learn? A teacher can teach, but is a child learning? Is
Yes.
a fundamental difference in that.
Can I ask about dyslexia, the word? Okay. You said you denied it until you were 35. Okay.
Yeah.
And did you call it dyslexia when you were young, like from age 7? Were you calling it dyslexia, or were you calling it something more like a learning difference or something like that? I'm just interested out, what did you call it?
I mean, I didn't want to call it anything, truth be told. I had
Really?
this desperate need to be normal, whatever normal
Yes.
is. I don't think that normal exists now, but in
Yeah.
my head, a normal person is able to read, is able to write, is able to talk and have a conversation. And I was so desperate to at least feel normal that I didn't want to have any association with having challenges. And obviously that was completely crazy, because that's where my challenges lay. I mean, I could never process. I mean, verbal processing, auditory processing from what someone said to what goes down on a piece of paper, I mean, with numbers particularly, was just, I mean, looking back, entertaining. If my mum's or dad's friends called up, oh yeah, could you leave a message and get your mum to give me a call back on this number?
On this number.
And she'd read it and she'd be like, that's not the phone number, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
No idea, Mum. Sorry. I tried my best.
Thank God for caller redial or whenever when it came in.
I'll just use that. But
So you didn't call it dyslexia when you were a child. You didn't say, I'm dyslexic.
No.
No. Did your parents say you're dyslexic?
Yes.
And how did you feel when they said you were dyslexic? If you were in kind of not accepting the label mode, did you kind of go, no, don't call me that, Mum, or don't say that? Or
did
you have a reaction to it?
I felt like I was dirty, like an associated shame of like not being normal. Like that feeling of this, I'm different. I didn't want to be different. And I think it was such a shaping time and defining time in those early years of your life. And particularly at that time and where we were in the journey of understanding the awareness of neurodivergent conditions. I mean, there probably only was dyslexia, right? We didn't really understand ADHD like we do now, and etc. But yeah, I didn't want to be associated with being different. I already knew that I was, without everybody else having to go, oh yeah, her in the corner. She's different.
So I've got to ask, sorry, I know we're getting close to our time, but there's so much to ask you. You mentioned the eating disorder, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about it, please feel free. But, that is another layer in all of this, that it would be interesting to know how that fitted into it.
Well, that again was related by a need to fit a mold, I suppose. And in that doing rhythmic gymnastics, you have to look a certain way, and because it improves the lines, etc. But it reached a point where my body just started to shut down. I was so malnutritioned, if that's the right word. I was completely bony, and my energy levels were non-existent really for what I was demanding of my body every day. And sadly, I had to make that choice to step away, because I don't know how long I could have gone on like that. Does it still impact me? I have a healthy, unhealthy relationship with food, probably. But I've always been an exerciser, it's what my brain needs to be able to keep me going. And I think that what grew as an eating disorder, it wasn't intentional, and it never is probably for people. And I have managed to get over it, and it's very painful for others that are still in that place. But I think that gymnastics was my place of belonging. And so I did cling on to that. And it felt like that's where I should have belonged, because I had this whole need to be normal and accepted.
And
yeah,
appreciated for what you can do. You're good at something. Yeah.
And I think when that felt like it was slipping away, that's what kind of prompted that. But I never really unpicked it in detail. There was a period of my life that kind of lasted a few years, but thankfully it took me a few years to get over it. But thankfully I am over it. But yeah, I guess all of these experiences, and the experience that I've had this week, has been a real pinch me moment through the journey that I have been on through my childhood of being told I'm not good enough and being made to feel huge lack of confidence, but knowing that through my journey of acceptance, I guess, that people probably should hear these stories, and people need to hear these stories. And it's amazing that you're bringing them to people that need to hear them, because, I listen to people that have been on similar journeys to me, and it is so inspiring. And just this week, I found myself in Parliament sharing the work that we're doing with our app, and not to share my journey, but to help others be able to share theirs. And that is very much the heartland and the whole driver and mission behind this My Best Mood, is so that children don't have to go through the pain that I felt that I did go through on my dyslexic journey, and that they can find an outlet to support their thoughts and feelings around things, so that they don't become completely challenging and build into something bigger than they need to be. So yeah, I was thrilled this week to have been invited to go and share our work in Parliament,
Yeah, what was that like? Who did you meet? What did you do? What's the process?
Yeah, so I was asked to come and provide evidence. So given that our project is Innovate UK funded and got us to the point that we're at, they invited me to their innovation showcase, which is led by the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So they have a Science, Innovation and Technology committee. And yeah, I got to talk about what we have done through our project, including research with 160 families, which really comes back to that point of mine, that one of the clearest findings: children do not want to be fixed. They want to feel like they belong. They want to feel supported and valued in a way that works for them. And that was the clearest finding of our research. And we're taking that forward. We want to pioneer that. We want to be their spokespeople. I think I want to make sure that children are understood and supported and heard in a way that works for them. Because in my experience with my daughter, that was not the case in state. And too many families are navigating these challenges without a map. And the challenge is that there is not enough preventative support and understanding and access to children to not let that happen. And sadly, parents, families, extended support networks, because it doesn't just end within your immediate family. It impacts granny, it impacts aunts and uncles, and a dysregulated child has ripple effect.
It dysregulates the whole family. It affects dinner times, it affects the mood in the evenings, it affects your parents' relationships, what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. There's just such a blast radius that no one really takes account of. And it's kind of like, dyslexia, that's learning to read. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you can read now. Sorted. No,
Yeah.
it's about processing, and it shows up learning to read first, but there's other processing things. And that blast radius is normally experienced in the home. The child bottles it all up at school, and then they come home and they either fight or they hide or they're crying. The amount of kids who are crying in their beds at night, and we think that it's sorted. It's not.
This is masking, right? And
Yes.
masking is a global issue, and particularly amongst girls. I mean, boys are good at it too, but girls are really good at it. And they will mask all day long at school and until they can't anymore. And then that's when burnout happens. And what really happens with girls in particular, they can just about manage at primary school. And then when the whole environment becomes too much, too many changes, too many transitions in secondary school environment, they don't go anymore. And on this journey, everything that we're doing is, of course, it is grounded in the wider evidence. And last year in the autumn term, 11.5 million learning days were lost in just one term because of children going to school, and 1 in 5 are now persistently absent. And you can absolutely believe that. If you look at the statistics of 1 in 5 persistently absent, 1 in 5 children recognized as having a neurodivergent need, but social, emotional and mental health needs are the fastest growing concerns within SEN. But, coming back to our earlier part of the conversation, that every child has emotional needs and social needs, but what we're then seeing is like so many are not going to school. There were 1 in 7 autistic children since September have not gone to school at all since September. And, that is growing rapidly. And then what does that mean for their social needs? Because their overall needs aren't being met. So what does that mean for their long-term development? And it's frightening, really. I think the problem is increasingly significant, and every single day it gets worse.
Yeah, it's such a waste in that if you don't solve it early on, and it has such a compounding effect. Joe, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, and that's really where the software and everything that you're developing is so crucial. I mean, there's so much, especially in sort of adult psychology, of the body keeps the score, and your emotions don't go away if you push them down and don't acknowledge them. So, but also a big part of wanting to belong, wanting to fit in is like, is it okay to feel like this? Is it all right to share this? We still have that as adults, and I clearly remember having it as a child. So to have a safe space to process how you're feeling, we communicate in stories, we make sense of the world through stories, to be able to make sense of those big feelings, those big events. You can just see it's going to change the trajectory for a lot of children's outcomes. It's going to be really significant.
Well, we hope so. I mean, I think we want to keep developing it with families. It's not for us, and I'm just one mum on a bit of a mission, but we'd love to connect more with teachers who are in this space wanting to make a difference to children's lives, and parents too who are interested in learning more and helping kids along their journey. So we do have a waitlist opportunity to find out more about what we're doing. Our website is evolving, I have to say. It's not completely polished. I think we were just an evolving
very place. Early stage.
That's great. But we can share its current evolution in the show notes, and people can sign up and join the waitlist and just follow the journey.
Yeah. Swipe up if you're listening just now. Well, you will be. Swipe up and you'll see whichever platform you're on. The show notes will appear, and there'll be a link there to other things, anything that you want to share, we'll put as links in there, including the waitlist. I think that's probably the best thing to do right now. Join that waitlist. And if you are a teacher or someone who can contribute, contact you directly and show interest as well. Absolutely. Can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can either connect with me via LinkedIn. I try to do lots on there. It's probably a good place. Or there's also an email on the website.
Perfect.
That's great. I mean, it's going to be great to just follow your story and see where it goes.
Yeah, it's
Um,
exciting times.
let's wind things up because we're getting close to past our time, really, your time. I think it would be helpful. Any final words, anything you would like to say to other parents out there, anything that you'd
Yeah.
like to finish off with?
I think the more we can believe in our youngsters, the further they will go. I think there's some real bad vibes around government plans right now with resilience. And resilience, in my opinion, doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from greater support. And actually, when we feel that we are supporting our children in the right way, is actually where their growth comes from, and growth mindset being so powerful in that journey. And of course, we all have to go through challenging moments and feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable. But actually, everything that I've learned in my journey, it's left scars. And I don't think it's right that we should have to go through having painful scars to get where we need to be. Children thrive from encouragement. Children thrive from having opportunity. And the more ways we can give them to thrive and give them opportunity, the more they will thrive, right? And it comes back to this point of supported, valued, understood, and a sense of belonging. And if we can get that right in more places for our children, I think we will all benefit, see the benefits from a societal point of view and from an economic point of view. But long-term mental health challenges and where they come from, well, they come from childhood. So if we can do more to support our children now, then what can the knock-on effect be later in life? So I think that for parents navigating this journey, I absolutely feel every part of it, having lived it as a child, having lived it as a parent, and it's exhausting, and it shouldn't have to be. It should be, we recognize your child has extraordinary ways of learning, and these are the things that we're going to do to help them.
Something stuck in my mind in your conversation. I know I said final words, but it's like you mentioned something that it sounded a bit like I tried everything when the baby was growing with the food and so on. And then you said something that was like, I failed or it didn't work or something like that. And it's like, how do you feel now? Do you think that something that was maybe how you felt at that point, but how do you feel now looking back?
I did what I could, I suppose. I did the research and I thought that it would work. And not everything can. You can't change what's going to be, but I think you can help on a journey to support in the right way. And I think that's the key, is that, okay, we're in this situation. And I think, on our journey when our daughter was 8 and saying some very dark things that, no parent wants to hear of a child that's age 8 or at any age. But the reality is bleak, is really bleak for a lot of families. And sadly, we are losing too many teenagers, which is just horrifying that is the state of affairs. But we can only do our best. I think that's the important thing here, right? Is that we can only do our best as parents, and we can only then help and encourage our children to feel like they can only do their best. Like that then, therefore, these feelings of not feeling good enough and the feelings of self-doubt come from deep worry and continuous deep worry that they aren't good enough, or they're made to feel stupid, or wherever those triggers are coming from aren't massaged out enough at the right time. So their worry has become too big to cope with. And that is a problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I brought it up because I think unconsciously sometimes parents can take on, this is an issue because of me, or I didn't do enough when they were at this stage, or I didn't do enough when they were learning to read, or I didn't do enough, and you start to take on some internal blame that it's your fault. And you might even sense it from the organization. Why are you not reading enough to your child or whatever? We often hear that in the podcast. But then you come to a realization that this is who they are and this is who they were meant to be.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong it's just that they're wired differently. Now, yes, it seems like the school turns it into a disability and turns out that they don't have the ability to teach them in the mode and way that suits them. But the disability is with the system rather than the person.
Exactly.
It's really, we seem to be wired. I think I was really affected by the dyslexic advantage and the way Dr. Brock and Furnett ID said this is not a deficit. I don't know how they phrase it, but it's a specialism. So one area of your brain gets more of that wiring at the cost of another. There's only so much wiring you can have, and it amplifies a certain specialism in your mind. And the cost is you're not so good at the procedural aspect of things as the typical person is. But it's an offset of advantage, and it's finding that advantage because our brains are just so much more specialized often. I just wanted to sort of bring that up because I think listening back on it, a lot of parents will be thinking, yes, I know what it feels like to blame myself.
And I think we'll always have that. What didn't we do well enough? But I've been on that road and questioning everything. What could I have done more of? What could I still do more of? And I don't think that will ever go away. Even I'm 41 and my parents probably still feel like that.
I think it's also parenthood.
Exactly. And it
yeah.
comes with the job, right?
Yeah.
That you're probably always going to have inbuilt guilt of what could I have done more of? But the reality is that we're having to do so much in the way in which I think the Scottish system is different in some ways. But for us here in the UK, I mean, it just doesn't feel like, you take a few steps forward with policy and it feels like they're just taking 12 back. It's very challenging. And right now, for them to be questioning whether a child should have an EHCP and removing the legal rights, it just feels like dark age stuff.
Sorry, could you explain what that means?
Yes, so an educational healthcare plan is normally required in order to access support and funding for a child who has special education needs. I mean, even the term special education needs is completely wrong, to your point of this is actually just a different way of learning and always has been. It's not that we talk about those moments where children can be fine at school, but when you read about this in the press, they're reserving these education healthcare plans to children that are more severe. Well, what does severe look like if a child's exceptional at masking and by the time they've come home, the story is completely different. They're vacant. They've got nothing left. They're completely and utterly burnt out. And that's the side that teachers don't see, even believe you. That was my experience. They actually thought I was making it up. And that is just awful. That was our life. Our weekends, well, they weren't weekends, they were survival. And that is the case and the reality. Undoubtedly in millions of children's homes around the country and around the world. And that's going to change because it's not sustainable for anybody and it shouldn't have to be. It's not fair and it's not right. Everybody deserves the respect that they deserve. And right now, children aren't getting that. And not only children aren't getting that, but parents aren't getting that either. And being forced to go to court to fight for your children to have an education, I mean, it beggars belief.
Well, Rose, thank you very much. We could keep talking for another hour, I know. But I think it's been great to hear your story, hear your passion. And we're gonna watch with interest what's it called again?
My Best Mood.
My Best Mood goes.
Oh,
Jo,
yeah.
any final?
Well, I just think it's so incredibly exciting. And I think over the course of our conversation, I'm thinking of that 7, 8, 9-year-old Rose who was at school, desperately bleak time, not wanting to acknowledge dyslexia. And now here's 41-year-old Rose who's addressing UK Parliament because of your dyslexia and because of the solution that you've created for it. And I guess similar to our mission and passion with Ivvi, it started with one of our daughters. But actually, you don't want to just stop at making it better for them. You want to make it better for all the children. So yeah, I'm just excited to watch your journey, your personal journey, the My Best Moods journey, but also, I guess, the journeys that we perhaps won't know the finer details of, but the journeys of all the children who will be on a different journey because they have access to that software and that support and that opportunity that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us and inspiring us. And yeah, please, to anyone listening, sign up and be part of the adventure as well.
Yeah, and we're talking like it's happened, but actually it's not out. It's not created. It's in,
but it will happen.
It's in the womb, and you do need investors and all sorts of other things to actually make it a reality. So those kind of things, Rose is out there, open to help and support. Get in touch.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share it with you both. It's been a real privilege and really grateful for your time. And yeah, I think, and that's where we'll see real life impact. We can talk about what it can do, but until people start using it and we can experience the difference that it does make to people's lives, hopefully it will. And we can hold some case studies and maybe even invite people to share their stories of using mindfulness.
Yeah, who knows? In
brilliant
2-3 years time, we might have another guest in that's sharing it, telling the story like you're telling the story about that program that really helped you.
Yes,
all of these different things that different people have laid. We're standing on the shoulders of not just giants but servants. These kind of mums and dads who have just bitten the bullet and saying, damn it, we're doing something about this, and leaving something for the next person. Great. We're all reaping the benefits of that.
And just one person I think is really important to call out on my journey who inspired me to start sharing, actually. There's a chap called Darren Clark. I don't know whether you're familiar with Darren.
Yes.
Yeah. Clark.
I'm in eternal hope that Darren will come on the podcast.
I've been on Darren's podcast as well. I did a little bit of a interview on Darren's podcast, and he said he'd come on ours. I don't think we've followed up with Darren. We need to. Okay, right.
He's wonderful, and I've met him face to face, but I've been involved in a couple of his networks, and just sharing and being part of a community, I think, want change is the most empowering part of what we do. I think, and collective change. We can't solve this alone, and we shouldn't pretend that we can. I think collective power is actually so critical to making change for the right children and adults, for that matter. We've all still got lives ahead. It's not just the kids we can impact, and I think we have to remember that too. Like, parents go on a big journey as well.
Well, till next time, Rose, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.